The Pacers make every shot in sight to take a commanding 3-1 series lead over what is now looking like a fairly wounded Bucks team, kind of on the ropes, making 22 three-point attempts last night, Samson. Two very different approaches from both of these teams as far as defensively and what they were trying to accomplish, I think, in my opinion. So what was your broad strokes takeaway from the Pacers being one win away from advancing out of the first round for the first time since 2014?
I hate injuries because of the human cost.
Mm-hmm.
I hate injuries because they make things like this less compelling than they should be. I thought, and had said as much on, the past podcast, that the Pacers had pretty well sorted out the Dame-led Bucks and were in a pretty good position with how they wanted to beat that team. And now you get a team led by two players I really like, Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, but altogether not a very compelling Bucks team, meaning that the Pacers, they can win games without performing very well. They can win games while allowing like significant slippage in certain aspects of the game. And they can win by 13 points. And that shouldn't be much of a worry because I don't think playoff games scale accordingly. Like rarely do NBA, Raptors fans, I saw a bunch of it on the TL. People are like, well, the Pacers should be embarrassed that they're not like destroying this Bucks team. But like playoff games don't really work like that. You don't just destroy a team. They're gritty games. But it was, to me, pretty worrying that they needed that insane three-point game, hitting 22 three-pointers to win by 13. And the fact that they let that Bucks team score 113 against them is pretty disappointing. All that said, you win a playoff game. That's one of a possible 7. That's 25% of what you need to advance. You can't turn your nose up at who's in front of you. You can't turn your nose up at wins. You just have to hope that they play better when the competition is a little bit better, that they play better when the team across from them is a little bit better, whether that's Giannis plus Dame or whether that's New York or Philly in the next round. They're close. We're getting there.
Some numbers from the first half. The Milwaukee Bucks scored 64 points, shot 23 of 31 on twos. So 74% on twos the Milwaukee Bucks went during that half. Obviously, the Pacers, like you said, outpacing them from three. This was very much a math game. But what did you take from the Bucks, in my opinion, being the overall lesser talented team and leaning into, we are going to lock down the paint. We're going to create a no-fly zone. We're going to back Brook way up into the paint. We're going to play zone and hope that team shoots more threes. Maybe we can shoot that many threes versus the Pacers being the more talented team and leaning into that and taking over 40 threes. And also on the flip side, at the other end of the floor, in a way, kind of funneling shots into Brook and Chris to lock down the three-point arc and risking some of what was going on from two, though not entirely what happened from two.
That was what I put in the piece. I was like, the Pacers are losing the vaunted short mid-range battle 12-0. Is that a thing? I don't think this is considered a battleground. But they lost it. There was one point, I believe, they were 9 of 11 from the short mid-range, the Bucks. Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis before he got ejected, Brook Lopez was sublime. These guys were just making a killing in that small space. And there is some truth to funneling, but sometimes I think funneling is lazier than it should be. Sometimes I think funneling is a little bit too much like, I'm funneling. It's like you can still pressure the funnel. You can still be right there with a rear view contest. You can still be so close. You can still bother guys. And I thought the lack of intensity from the Pacers was
So you don't think that Pat Connaughton should get all the way to the rim out of empty side pick and roll with no stun at the nail?
I don't, quite frankly. That is not something I think. And, some of it was just really good shot making and credit to Brook being able to step back to 28 in a pinch, step back to 27 in a pinch. For Chris, it didn't stay that way throughout the whole game, that level of shooting. But early on, getting to spots, hitting difficult ones, over the left shoulder, over the right shoulder, all that kind of stuff, great. But this is something that just because a team doesn't have a ton of offensive talent doesn't mean you relax. I think what it means to me is pressure goes up. Pressure the ball. And obviously, as we saw, the 5-minute scoreless stretch, how it kind of turned on towards the end of the game, that ball pressure was really important. I hate when teams think, oh, this guy can't shoot, this guy can't whatever, like just leave it. It's like, no, ball pressure is really good. And the Pacers kind of clicked into that later on, but I don't know. It was pretty hapless hoops for a good amount of time, defensively anyway.
The fact of the matter is they were pressuring the ball in the first half in ways that I found, for example, they've been pressuring the ball a lot more over the back end of the season, mainly with Andrew Nembhard. So something that I noticed, like when they were playing the Lakers in LA, is whether it was Austin Reeves or D'Angelo Russell bringing up the ball, it didn't matter. Like Andrew was going to be the person who pressured it so that Tyrese wouldn't ever be putting into those situations. In this game, no matter who was bringing up the ball, that person was supposed to extend that pressure. So just from your outside perspective, because I genuinely don't know, I haven't really written it down from the Raptors games that we've crossed over and done. How often has Pascal Siakam been responsible for pressuring the ball the full length of the floor?
Not often.
Yeah, because I mean, like just to show people a couple of examples of this, like that's him pressuring Pat Connaughton at 3/4 court all the way up. Yeah. This happened pretty frequently in the third quarter, and then here he is picking up Andre Jackson at half court and really applying clear out there against somebody who's not exactly known for their shooting. So I was a little bit surprised by how much they were having him chase well beyond out the 3-point arc. So that's why I wanted to get your insights on that, on how often you've actually seen that and whether it's been effective.
Yeah, I think Pascal with the Raptors this season, that used to be a thing. Like he had a playoff series against the Wizards when John Wall was still healthy, when Bradley Beal was, a younger man, where he was John Wall's check. And he's like had Russell Westbrook for regular season games where he picks him up full court. And Pascal used to be that type of, he slowed down a little bit as he gets older. But the past couple of years, no, that just hasn't been his bag at all. It's an interesting wrinkle though. And especially with lesser ball handlers, can hurry up in offense, get them to go into to work out of spots that maybe they don't want to be working out of, that kind of stuff. But not something I expected to see, really.
The effect of it towards the back end of the regular season, when it was just exclusively Andrew doing it, was you started seeing those teams tilt more of the offense into okay, now Alex Caruso is going to run more pick and roll. Because if Tyrese isn't going to be the person guarding the bring up ball handler, then we're going to shift more of those possessions that way, because it was becoming harder to hunt him because he was using more show coverage. So teams were kind of reorienting who was going to be the ball handler as often. But then last night, the Pacers obviously shifted that, given that pretty much everyone was applying full court pressure, especially when Pat Connaughton was bringing the ball up the floor. But to me, a pretty key piece, and we look at how both teams approached this, was the post. So we kind of talked about the idea of maybe more of the offense being shifted to Brook Lopez, but for a different reason, because I was postulating maybe you flip those matchups, maybe you put Aaron Nesmith on him just so you can switch ball screens. Maybe they front the post. Maybe that shifts more of the offense into Brook's hands. As it turned out, because they were undermanned and Dame wasn't available, that kind of happened anyways. And the thing that stood out to me about it is in the early portion of the season for the Pacers, they were not doubling on any post-ups at all. To extreme level. This is the first preseason game they played, and this is when I knew that their approach was going to be very much, we're going to stay home on shooters as much as possible, because this is Jaren Jackson Jr. when they're playing an exhibition game in Memphis. He takes 4-pound dribbles, and not a single person even stunts or attempts to make a dig to get him off balance, and he gets to his strong left hand and finishes over the top of Obi Toppin. And I thought, it's exhibition. Maybe that's not something that's going to stick, but then up until coincidentally, the Raptors came to Indy the day before American Thanksgiving, and they were very proactive doubling Pascal Siakam, and then their rotations out of the double teams weren't great, and Pascal kind of picked them apart that way. That was the first time that they had really been hey, we're going to double post up and make, the surrounding shooting beat us because of what Toronto's shooting situation was. And last night was very much a return to that. They were not doubling if Miles was guarding Brook Lopez in the post, which Miles kind of has a little bit of a reputation for not being great at defending his own position in post-up situations. So these are all just against Miles in this, where you're not seeing anybody even go and dig. It's definitely one-on-one, communicating to me that the Pacers were yeah, we're going to be okay if Brook or Chris beat us on twos, because we're anticipating that they're going to, as I said, play zone, play more drop, and, math 3 is greater than 2. But what did you think about that strategy? Because this went on for the majority of the game.
I'll ask you a question. What do you think is more dangerous? Like Brook Lopez getting to go one-on-one in the post, or making the Bucks move the ball to the opposite side and making whoever is in that opposite side either hit like a semi-contested three or operate with advantage and make like a progressive read or get all the way to the bucket?
I guess it depends how much you trust Brook Lopez as a post passer, which I haven't watched probably enough film to know how many reads he makes out of there. Because like in the past, I think you could probably point to like, oh, the Pacers are playing Jonas Valanciunas in the playoffs and force Jonas Valanciunas to make a pass. You're going to be better off there. But I think overall I would have been if I were the Pacers, it took them making 22 threes. I think at a certain point in time, I would have been like, they have depleted star power, and yet we're expecting the stars that they have left to just kind of run out of gas at this point in time. Like, I would have rather beat their role players on a depleted skeleton team than do what the Pacers were attempting to do. But that's just my opinion.
That's exactly where I'm at too. Brook is really fantastic in the post. He's a tremendous post scorer. There's a couple things intersecting here that I think Brook is a much better scorer out of the post than he is a passer.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times you can make him make the one pass away, right back out pass. And we've seen countless big men have trouble in playoff series and offenses, screech to a halt because teams are like, you're just going back above the break. Like, we can really handle that with rotation. I think you can get Brook to do that one. And I think the Bucks, as we talked about prior, they're not like an elite cutting team necessarily. And they have guys like these guys aren't, whether it's Pat Connaughton, whether it's like Andre Jackson, whether it's AJ, whoever is getting the ball, you have to believe in yourself to rotate to that guy. And rotating to that guy, I think, is simpler than it is, stopping Brook Lopez with Miles Turner. And hopefully these types of questions aren't asked for much longer in this series. Hopefully, the Pacers can kind of like tuck this thing away and you start, teeing up the other, whether it's the Knicks or the 76ers. But I don't think they made the points per possession play. Of course, I'm not an NBA coach. NBA coaches know way more than I do, every single one of them that is on that bench. But to me, they didn't make the points per possession play. Now, there might be something more, but I thought they could have played better defense than they did, even just scheme-wise.
Yeah, because for the regular season, if people don't know, they averaged 36.8 closeouts per 100 possessions. And I think a lot of times if you just looked at the numbers for the Pacers and saw, oh, they're allowing the fewest threes in the NBA, I think most people assume that's because they were running people off the line really hard. And in reality, that is the lowest closeout rate in the NBA by like 6 closeouts per 100. Because they were just staying home on everybody and allowing stuff like that to go on. So last night they had a slightly higher closeout rate, 44 per 100, which would be like the equivalent of the 23rd ranked team in the NBA. Still very low. But even if you could like get by and be like, we didn't want to cross match. We wanted to leave Miles on the island with Lopez. Maybe we thought he would fare a little bit better than what he did on some of those possessions. The ones that surprised me even more were where Chris Middleton's getting a mismatch, Gallo's getting a mismatch, Lopez is getting a mismatch. And again, just to bring up, like the Pacers had changed their strategy on this. So this is when they're playing the Portland Trailblazers. Jeremy Grant had walked Tyrese Halliburton into the post several times during the fourth quarter. The Pacers wanted them to be doubling from the top against the post entry passer. So Benedict Mathurin should have already been smashing down. He never goes, and Jeremy Grant's able just to turn easily. And then you can watch Rick Carlisle in the background immediately calls that timeout and ends up having a very long and heated discussion on the sideline with Benedict Mathurin after that. TJ, nobody comes to double. I mean, Pascal eventually does rotate over there when TJ gets dusted. But this is just like over and over again. Like now Tyrese is going to end up on Gallo. Nobody comes in doubles. They're just willing to live with him turning around and shooting over the top. Like typically it's been like a 9-1-1 call after about midway through the season that if Tyrese gets a post mismatch, they automatically go and double. There, Chris loses TJ. Chris also gets one like at the nail, a post up where nobody even takes a step towards it. So this just leads me to believe that this is really what they intended to do going into this game, that they're just like, hey, Chris has been injured. They're depleted. Those guys are going to have to play big minutes. Maybe we'll just see if they can. They're not going to overwhelm us the whole game, and we're going to outshoot them. But that just seems like a really risky bet if the Pacers didn't make shots, as they didn't make shots in Game 3.
I know it's like strong side corner stuff. I got to look up what Jay Crowder shot from the corner this season. But like Middleton being able to go to work and get a straight line drive on TJ is like, I don't know, that's pretty crazy to me.
Yeah.
But man, there's when you when you look at this Bucks team, the offensive firepower, the fact that the Pacers, you knew where the Bucks had to go, the same way the Bucks know what the Pacers want to do. You didn't really move them away from anything that they liked, which is a shame. I think, like, not even they win the game, it's fine, but also it is that lack of like ability to impact the other team's offensive hierarchy, ability to impact the other team's offensive wants. And that's what was the most disappointing aspect of this game. And like, I'm glad they hit threes. We got a couple runs in this game that were really fun. Miles, like partaking in a small bit of history for the amount of threes made by a center in back-to-back games, right? That kind of stuff, super fun. And Tyrese coming around, shooting 3 or 4 inside the arc. A couple times he took that deeper dribble, big step to the rim, finish off the glass. All that stuff is great, but you got to be able to imprint upon the defense. You got to make the offense change some things, and the Bucks didn't really have to. So I don't know. The Pacers could be playing a numbers game here, but I think that the Bucks are so bereft of offensive talent that like it shouldn't even be like we'll win the numbers game. It's like, no, go win the game. Like, go win it on defense.
And they did make a slight adjustment in the third quarter because you did see them help. Like Andrew had a really good help, especially against Chris Middleton, because Chris likes the left block and he likes to turn middle. So Aaron was trying to prevent him from turning middle, and Andrew came and sent the help on that side so that they'd force him baseline. They did have another one too where I'll be self-indulgent because I was like, hey, look, Aaron's guarding Brook and fronting him, and then Siakam went and doubled and they had to force it out, and this is what you're talking about. That's not a really great and clean rotation out of that.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
That's the exact same rotation that the Wolves made last night before Ant had his really big dunk. Mm-hmm. It was Cat was above the break where Pascal was. The ball went into the post, and Cat had to scram Mike Conley out. And the Wolves rotated 5 guys on the string to the opposite corner, made Beal didn't have an open three. Beal had to put the ball down. They rotated to the rim. Beal tried to make a bounce pass to the corner, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker got back to steal it. Huge difference. The exact same play, basically, except the Pacers didn't even move the Bucks far enough down the offensive line of like decision, because you're meeting defense. You have to keep making decisions. They got a wide open corner 3. Like,
yeah, because I mean, they don't make the right rotation here. Andrew needed to stay with the cutter. Miles has to be on the fly of the ball. Tyrese needs to be with Chris, and then Aaron rotates back out to the furthest possible pass. So it was a little bit late, but I still think I would have preferred that overall. Like, even with that being a late closeout. Yeah,
I do prefer this. They just didn't do it well. Like, that's
always a question. Exactly that.
Yeah, you and I are definitely in the same boat. Like, I prefer that. It's just like, guys, come on. Like, we can do a little better than this. Yeah.
And I definitely do want to clarify for anybody listening, like, the 2-point rate from the Bucks was not entirely off of post-ups. There was a lot of other things going wrong for the Pacers defensively that certainly weren't schematic. I don't think anybody from the Pacers bench was like, hey, get wrecked on a Pat Connaughton empty side pick and roll and allow him to go all the way to the rim. Or also some of the sideline out of bounds stuff where like Siakam's face guarding Pat Connaughton and gets back cut and has no idea where the ball even is. Another sideline out of bounds play, I think, where Brook is able, or that was a baseline one where he's able to just easily slip out of it when they had a miscommunication on who was supposed to be rotating to the corner. Like those little types of breakdowns that keep, like, it's a convincing win and what they're doing offensively and the adjustments they're making, but it's always being intermingled with very unconvincing defense and prolonged stretches of it.
If you had looked at the box score after this game, it's fine. It really is. Mm-hmm. If you'd watch this game and saw like punch, counter punch, punch, counter punch, you're like, surely you can get a stop, right? Like, put the clamps down. Instead of like, you can provide help. Instead of Chris Middleton being able to live at 11 to 8 feet, why can't he live between 14 to 18? Why can't your defense do this? Because the Bucks on the other end, and yes, they have Brook, but that's not like an incredible defense or a cast of defenders there either. They're setting up in the gaps. The Pacers have some good drivers. They're pushing them out. Like they're applying the doubles and the pressure, and it worked much better in the second half. And like Nemhard had a really nice cut, which led to the corner 3 off of Pascal's, like one of his first post ups in the game. But yeah, the Bucks being able to like have more of an imprint there than the Pacers did is like, damn, but them's the breaks, I suppose.
Actually, let's just flip it to the other side of things, because I do want to talk about the post-ups for the Pacers as well, and what you just mentioned about Andrew making that cut off of Pascal's. So the difference, a completely different approach. The Bucks are going to double Pascal every time he touches it in the post, whereas the Pacers were really trying to avoid doubling pretty much as possible. Nembhard does make that Laker cut and then kicks it to Miles Turner in the corner for one of his mini threes that he made on the night. They were cutting off the post entry passer pretty heavily, but you can see the sink that's coming on Pascal on most everything when he gets a foot in the paint. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why I wanted to bring this up is he has a number of assists in this game. Like, they did screen and cut away a little bit more.
This made me so happy, by the way. I was like, wow, they did it. Like, TJ cut through. And then TJ also had, here we go. Great work from TJ here, quite frankly. Get the angle. Find it, make the cut down the middle for audio listeners. Oh, wait, there's no audio listeners for this one. Yeah, great job, TJ. Great job.
Point being is, I kind of wanted to bring back something that you had said on the last pod, because I wanted to expand on it, and I didn't stop you when you said it. But you said that you think that the spacing for Pascal hasn't really changed from going from Toronto to the Pacers. He just has more capable shooters around him than what was in Toronto. Do you still stand by that position?
Yeah, I think once you get to a certain level of being like a driving force, once you get to a certain level of being a guy who gets to the paint, and Pascal's pretty nifty in the mid-range. He went over 4. That was the tough thing about last night's game for Pascal, was he missed all of his threes and he missed a few bunnies. Hopefully that turns around against better competition, right? But the thing is, once you get to a certain level, teams don't care how good the shooting is, really. Like, they're going to be in the gaps regardless. And Miles Turner can have as many 35 to 37% three-point shooting seasons as he wants at his big height. Teams are not going to say, we would rather Pascal get into the paint than have Miles Turner shooting above the break threes. Right. Or even Aaron Nesmith, even Obi Toppin. They won't care. And Nesmith, Turner, Toppin are shooters of more. They're much better shooters than what Pascal was playing with in Toronto. But teams are just always going to be like, why would we let a guy get so deep in the paint? Let's just not do that. And especially these Bucks. So, yeah, I think that some teams are able to affect spacing in certain ways, but in most teams are just able to punish helping more than they are create like these big, huge driving lanes. Like, obviously there's split action stuff coming out of Golden State for years and years and years, but I think I'm more so on the like punishing help rather than making sure there is no help.
I think what was interesting is pretty shortly after the trade happened, because Tyrese only played that one game against Portland and then was back out with the hamstring injury. You could tell in the first game against Portland that, like, oh, hey, if he goes and screens away and runs a split action, now it's in isolation for Pascal, whereas games in Toronto, if Dennis Schroeder's doing that, it's a double team. Like, but when he was out of the lineup, though, it was heavily, even though they still had Buddy at that point in time, they still had Aaron Nesmith in the starting lineup, they're still playing Miles. Like, Denver was doubling Siakam, and it was more what you're saying, that it was forcing shooters to take advantage of what were then open shots that they were getting, which is different than when, the Raptors players are getting open shots in those same situations.
The points per game bears it out.
But the one place where I think I will differ with you is some of the spacing, and I shouldn't use the word spacing, I should use the word positioning, that the Pacers are able to put around Pascal. Like I pointed out on the podcast with you and Lewis, I don't think that Toronto's starting lineup could have even done. Because, like, who in Toronto's starting lineup am I going to put Andrew Nembhard in the dunker with Siakam at the elbow, put Tyrese at the opposite wing, and Miles Turner in the ball side corner, and Aaron Nesmith in the weak side corner? I can't accomplish that with Toronto's starters and create that wide of a gap for Pascal to be able to dribble into. Even if they are shrinking those gaps somewhat, which they were in the clips that I showed, he was losing the ball, but he was never really losing the ball because the gap was that wide. Like, you can't accomplish that same alignment with the people that he was playing with before, I guess would be my only difference.
There's definitely like a level of pressure, but I still think like, man, the help still comes eventually. It's just about like maybe how quick it comes.
Although
but
there was a viral clip that went around last night because they had put Nemhard in the dunker and Miles got a drive all the way to the rim with Patrick Beverley as the rim protector, and like, oh, this is a nifty thing that the Pacers have just done for the very first time. It's like they have not. I've made numerous videos about this. I love the inverted spacing, but I guess the next point is the stretch fives. Let's talk about that and how the pick and pop was defended by both teams, or rather, wasn't necessarily defended by both teams.
Can I just give Miles a quick little bit of credit? I love the guys who like little C above the break, hunting shots. Miles coming off of it and like shading and tracing Andrew's drive, getting that ball and just like letting that fly. He will not. Miles Turner does not change my thoughts on the stretch five. And you and I think are very aligned on this, but that's cool basketball. I love that stuff. That's like Karl Anthony Towns does that. Jaren Jackson Jr. when he's on like one of his 3-week knuckleball
completely
3
unhinged.
heaters. Yeah, which I love more than anything. That's fun. Like Miles was really fun. He's the past 3 games, not all 3 were big blow up games, but decision making has been better and the shot making over the past 2 has been sublime. So credit to Miles for that.
I like that you brought up the play about him at the top of the key because I have an entire article written about that play that is sitting in a draft ready to be published tomorrow because that was a really great wrinkle at that minute mark. It was a really great wrinkle at that minute mark because Tyrese was the stack screener. And as you know from previous conversations we've had, it was a big adjustment for Tyrese to go from I'm averaging 50 picks per 100 possessions as the ball handler to now I'm kind of still dealing with an injury. Buddy Hield's no longer here anymore. And now I'm the best movement shooter on the floor. And I have to make reads as a stack screener. And on that particular play, he flipped around as the stack screener to set a top pin on Brook to free Miles up for that shot because Brook was getting ready to hop around him. He was already deeper. And that was just a great ad lib for Tyrese to get him open. And then as it turns out, not to spoil the article too much, but over the next 3 minutes, the Pacers ran the exact same play on 6 of the next 7 possessions with the Bucks consistently making changes. Like they weren't just doing it against the same type of defense. It's like, let's try to switch the ball screen. Now let's try to switch the guards with the big hopping around it. Well, this isn't working with Brook. We can't switch with Brook at all. Let's put Brook back on Pascal in the corner and just have 3 guards switch the whole thing. Nobody could stay in front of Andrew. They tried to duck under against Andrew, and Andrew still turned the corner and got all the way to the rim. And I felt like that 3 minutes, more than maybe anything from the first 4 games of this series, was emblematic of why I kind of feel like the series is over. Because that was the Bucks cycling through every option they really have without Giannis defensively. And somebody else can step up to be the quote-unquote hero in every one of those scenarios. And that's kind of what this was, right? Like Miles and Tyrese, especially Miles, get to step up to be the hero in this game because Miles isn't going to get guarded in the pick and pop. The Bucks made a very calculated decision. We don't think we can switch with Brook. The blitzing did not work. We were giving up too many numbers advantages. Too many reads were being made there. 2 points per chance when Tyrese gets blitzed in the prior game. So now we've gone back to drop. And that's not really feasible either. It's been the agrarian economy of buckets. The crops were planted last night. They grew. They bloomed. So.
Very good. Yeah, I think this is what we talked about before the series. And Giannis can affect some of this. Dame can't. The Bucks were in a tough position with how they're going to guard Tyrese. And that's Tyrese probably will get selected to an All-NBA team. Well, maybe he will, maybe he won't. Tough finish this season. He was an all-star. He has these big, sexy statistics. He helps drive one of the best offenses in the NBA. He's supposed to put teams in the mixer. How do we do this? And also him being a guy who's like, and always credit to any guard that does this, that takes it on themselves to like, how do I improve off the ball? How much value can I mine with my movement or my screening ability? Because he's a slight guard, but he's not a small guard. this kind of stuff, him elevating himself that way to get a little bit extra out of plays for other guys, it's, puts the Bucks in a lot of these pressure positions, and they don't necessarily have the personnel to navigate it all the time, especially when Bobby Portis gets himself thrown out of the game for trying to rub Andrew's head very aggressively.
I gotta know, what were you thinking when Patrick Beverley did too small to Andrew Nembhard?
I like it.
And what is your opinion of the too small gesture in general?
I think the too small gesture is a meme.
I think it's icky.
I think it's a meme. I like the meme behavior because, like, there's nothing, I don't know, there's no danger to it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just
the policing of it was absurd, but I still find the actual gesture to be icky. It's a turnoff.
So when I score on Trey, it's too small. When, like, we do it all the time when we play pickup, I think it's lost its bite. Like, Patrick Beverley doing it is like, ugh, I let Patrick Beverley get one off on me is probably what Andrew was feeling.
I think if you gave up 4 offensive rebounds to a dude in the prior game in overtime, maybe you just keep the too small gesture to yourself.
Well, but that's Pat Bev is the guy, and that's why I like it, because it's not necessarily not necessarily what you and I discuss most in basketball, but these types of, like, braggadocious guys who are only ever able to fall from grace, which is Patrick Beverley's whole thing, is like, I'm talking trash all the time. I won't win it all, but I'm always talking trash. Like, he never gets to say it from the mountaintop. He's always yelling it from the base, it just means people have more to talk about. It adds to the entertainment value without, I think, taking anything away from on the court stuff. Now, as far as Nembhard and Beverley, I mean, you and I, we've talked about Nembhard a good deal. Maybe we can talk about him a little bit right now. Awesome. Like, being really, really great, especially the past 3 games, has sorted out a lot of the stuff. The Bucks have tried to, like,
he stood on the 3-point line and made threes at a range.
Like, that's great. And Nembhard has been like the 3rd best guard in this series. It's important that he is. He had to be. And if Giannis or Dame come back, like, he has to continue to be. And in the next series, he has to punch up above a spot. Like, he has to be better than, like, Kyle. He has to be better than Healed. He has to be better than, let's say, like, DiVincenzo. He has to be better and, like, be equivalent to Josh Hart or something like that. Like, that's where Nembhard can be. That's where he has to be for this Pacers team. And that's where he has been. He's been awesome. So Pat Bev can talk all the trash he wants. I like that it's happening. And especially because Pacers fans just be like, yeah, well, why don't you, like, Pat Bev isn't good enough for this. Like, just talk it back, I guess.
I mean, Pascal got a technical as well for
that was so silly.
Staring menacingly, apparently.
That was what I tweeted about. I was like, Anthony Edwards is hosting, like, the roast of Kevin Durant live on court. Like, he's calling him old. He's like, you're old as hell. I'm taking you out of here. Like, I'm putting you in a retirement home. And he's doing it, like, for 23 minutes of gameplay. Then he's doing it to Booker. Then he's doing it to Beal. And everyone's like, this is great. And Pascal and Portis, the long-standing feud that you correctly pointed out, maybe Portis just has it with everybody, because then Portis aggressively rubbed Andrew's head and got thrown out of the game. Pascal gets, like, what I wrote in the piece for anybody who played those Pokemon games, like Pokemon, the early Game Boy games, is the Team Rocket lairs. They'd have these floor tiles that would have arrows on them, and they'd shoot you around. Like, you had no more autonomy. You would just be at the whim of the floor as it directed you places. That's what happened to Bobby Portis. If I didn't have, headphones that were connected to the computer, I'd shoot myself out of frame. But, like, Portis got shifted out of frame. Pascal punches it and then kind of, like, stares him down. Tech. Why? There's emotion. Like, let's have a little fun here, please. Half the good players are injured. Let's have some fun. What are we doing? Yeah, anyway. This is the least basketball, and my apologies to the people who listen to Caitlin for basketball insights. I'm talking about Pokemon, emotion, too small, entertainment. My apologies.
Let me tell you, last year I wrote a story about TJ McConnell and petty pageantry, where he had mimicked and mocked Steve Kerr's play call gesture when he read it and knew what it was, and then he came back down the court and was like being very demonstrative in Steve Kerr's face. I wrote a story about that explaining what had gone on, and there was comments that were like, this is the best article that has been posted in Indie Cornrows. We need to have more explanations of pettiness. So I think that people will probably like the Pokemon comparisons and your other allusions on both those topics. But actually, with regards to Andrew, like doing that late, especially out of that same play, like 6 out of the 7 times where he was being the ball handler, that was something that I talked about at the beginning of the year when I did the dunker spot. They asked me, like, what do you think is the biggest area for Tyrese in terms of growth? And I had said at the time, like, hey, I really watched the minutes that he played with Jalen Brunson at Team USA a lot because he was going to be off ball. And in my opinion, if he could become a better role player, it would make him an even better star. And you could see that the Pacers are like, hey, he's getting face guarded more, he's getting pressured more, and they would use him as the screener. It wasn't to the same effect when you're trying to do some of that with Bruce Brown as the ball handler, or who else was getting filtered those touches. And now to see it in the playoffs where Tyrese has improved some of his screening technique and nuances here at a high level, and to have a 2 guard who can run offense. You and I both value that, especially in the playoffs. That's something we talked about, is having somebody out there who can actually run plays at the secondary spot as well. So definitely been a good 3 games from him overall.
Tyrese can get out ahead of this thing. This happens for a lot of stars. They max out on their on-ball stuff, and they just always neglect the rest of offense. Like, this is a real... Luka has improved at some things, but this is a real thing about Luka. This was a real thing about Russ. This was a real thing about Harden. And Harden is starting to figure out a little bit more, but he's like 33. Tyrese can get out ahead of this stuff by, and not to say he's poor at it, but like improving this stuff early, being a more holistic offensive player instead of like, I dictate the offense, it runs through me, and then I'm not exactly sure what happens outside of that. Being able to be like everything for an offense and then a cog outside of that is such an impressive ability. And Ty is still pretty young, man. Like, first playoffs, working through stuff, the game winner we talked about, you know, the prescience of it all, seeing the play before the play happened, preparing for the expected outcomes, going against that. This is that adjustment just as well. And especially, like, as you said, like in the middle of the play, making that ad-libbing a screen, knowing what you're supposed to do here. These are great adjustments. And these are the small things that grease the wheel for a holistic stardom. And he has the shooting touch. And, you know, once he's fully healthy, maybe an off season, whenever it comes, will be really good for him to come out gunning at the start of next season too. He has the shooting ability and the passing ability. If he has like off-ball stuff, on-ball stuff, he really could be just like a world-ending offensive presence. So credit to Ty for that.
And it's the difference between when you're a heliocentric option and you deactivate away from the ball versus maybe you have a little bit less of the ball, but you're active 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. You're constantly making a defense guard in some way, shape, or form. Because again, like last night, there were times on those possessions where he wasn't even touching the ball, but it's like, oh, I'm not going to set a stack screen now. It's just going to be a shallow cut, and I'm going to go to the opposite corner. And because I relocated to the opposite corner, now Brook Lopez has to defend 2-on-1, and he's going to be the first person having to chase out of the X-out rotation, where that wouldn't have been the case before. It distorts the tag, or, you know, different things like that.
Well, he is also the guy who, like, this was when I was talking about the spacing R.E. Pascal, I had said, like, this is a conversation I've been having with my friends. Myself and another friend, we were talking about and sending, like, screenshots of, like, does this seem like good spacing to you? Like, Pascal's still seeing a lot of bodies. However, you can see that there's one guy on the court who will always affect spacing, even if he's sitting there with his hands in his pockets. Dum-de-dum-de-dum. Tyrese is just has so much gravity, and people really want to make sure, like, I'm always in deny. It's like that meme, you know, I think it was Supreme Dreams. They're like, as soon as Steph Curry gets out of bed, a guy is like there playing like hand in face defense. Tyrese isn't quite there, but you always want to be in the vicinity. Like you treat Tyrese like, if you're guarding Tyrese, you're like a parking law enforcer. Like, you're always sneaking around. You always want to be present to like mark the tire. You want to hit your quota for tickets. You always got to be around and looking. You can't forget it. You got to be ever present.
As an aside, can I just say that I think it's really funny that you have these secret group chat friends that you share insights about the Pacers with, but yet like you don't share these with me.
Well, no, these guys, they're. Why would I share them with you, Caitlin? Think about this. You would ask for this, and yet you would refrain from reading my articles so as not to taint your own analysis.
I guess I was meaning outside of the podcast. Like you never like
Mm.
sent me messages during the season about like, hey, look at this Pacers thing.
This one friend of mine, he sends me the messages. He sends me like 18 messages, and he says like, "Stop."
Basketball, do you have any other broad takeaways from this game that I didn't include in the list of things that I send you that I don't know how much you actually look at or care about?
Obi. I like Obi a lot. I like Ben Shepherd a lot. Maybe this wasn't Ben hitting 2 threes against his own.
Mm-hmm.
One of them being a very quick trigger.
Yes.
I'm not really highlighting like strategic stuff. I'm mostly just trying to like superlatives right now.
Sure.
Obi playing fast, awesome. I really do think, and like this is the problem.
If you give up 3 leak outs in a row after made shots, what are we even doing?
The problem with this is like I realized what I did the one time where I'd written in the piece where I was like, well, it's not about the Pacers playing like good or bad defense or whatever. I was like, that's just Caitlin's writing for one. And I like sometimes you've written so extensively about this team. I wonder if I'm like stepping on toes. Have you called Obi the bellwether for hot girl basketball before?
I've not. You did on the prior podcast.
I know, but I was like, she might have said this, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've got this thing. But he really is, it seems to me.
Hot girl basketball came and to an end when James Harden did snow angels on the sidelines and the Clippers had scored 150 points on the Pacers. That's when comments were made that like, hey, we need to actually start paying some.
Oh, I guess the back of the chair is too high, but
you can see it.
Okay. Well, yeah. Pretty girls can guard too.
Actually, since you are talking about Obi Toppin, what did you make of the minutes when Gallo was at 5 and it was 2 spread lineups and there was a flurry of possessions where Chris Middleton had a 0-pass layup and then TJ McConnell had a 0-pass layup? There was no rim protector. So this is something we haven't talked about actually, because Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith have largely been removed from the rotation, which is something that I had tweeted in game 1. Like they probably need to look at that when Bobby Portis is at the 5. They did. They've played heavily with Obi and Pascal Siakam. They've shortened the rotation down for the most part, although Doug was thrown back out there for a few minutes against the zone last night. What do you think about slashing the center position to a degree, and would you have looked at that a little bit more last night when the Bucks went to that small spread lineup?
I think they've found a decent balance of it. I like where it's at currently, and I think they found like a player who's so important to what the Bucks do, Brook, that he represents like an intersection for this series, like an inflection point, and trying to like outplay the Bucks on that principle, going small sometimes, I think is good. Now, it was, I thought, extremely frustrating. Obi is better than Gallinari.
Mm-hmm.
Gallinari should not be able to hang on the floor. Like, I think that's a real shame.
And but he was hunting mismatches against Tyrese and just shooting over the top.
Anyway, it's a mildly frustrating watch because they shouldn't be going like toe to toe.
Right.
The Pacers, as soon as Gallinari steps on the floor, like Pascal did it. He put him on his butt and then went and dunked it. Because like Gallinari, he's a great shooter. He certainly, I thought the 76ers might have won the championship if they had traded for him in 2018-19 instead of Tobias Harris. Like I thought he was that good then. That's what the 76ers needed. But he can't be on the floor. Like you got to put him in everything. You got to like hunt that. He can't move, man.
Yeah.
And then having him get it back on the other end because you're just unwilling to make the Bucks go to something else.
Because the interesting thing is the main way they were guarding during that is they put Pascal on Jay Crowder and we're just having him sag off of Jay Crowder. And then if he got put into the screening action, they were putting Pascal in drop. And then that was just like low hanging fruit out of a 2-man game because like, I don't know what your overall opinion of Siakam and drop coverage has been when he's the screener defender. I felt like, I mean, one of the telling things I think about Pascal as a defender, which I did think he had better moments, especially in the second half of this game when he was doing some of that extended pressure.
Yep.
But when they were in New Orleans, I thought it was very telling that they put Pascal Siakam on Jonas Valanciunas, put Miles on Zion, and put Nesmith on Brandon Ingram. It's like, okay, you finally have a big wing, and he's not guarding either of the big wings. You've put him on Jonas Valanciunas. And then not only did they put him on Jonas, they weren't having him switch. So, like, if CJ McCollum got a screen from Jonas Valanciunas, Pascal Siakam was playing drop coverage.
We didn't see much of Pascal and drop over his last however long with the Raptors because, again, he and Scottie had done that flip between, like, who's hawking the baseline. And then also, like, Jakob Poeltl had been traded for however long. And the Raptors, like, basically what happened, the Raptors switch heaps and heaps and heaps with Nick Nurse, and then they trade for Poeltl. They stop switching as much, but that also means that Pascal is not the drop guy. And then the next season, like this past season, Scottie takes the lower role in the defense. Pascal plays higher above the break. So how long has it been since I've seen Pascal play drop as a Raptor? Like, it hadn't happened in a year, like more than that. It just wasn't super common.
To me, he looks uncomfortable both sides of it when it's a chase over and drop. If he has to chase over, or if he's the screener defender and he's in drop, I would prefer him in switch on both sides of the ball. But that's somewhat counter to what the Pacers scheme has been as a whole, especially depending upon what his matchup is. So I always think that's a little bit of a delicate balance, but that it did get a little bit dicey during the spread lineup versus spread lineup minutes, at least in the first half last night.
He's also a cheap defender. Like Pascal, the reason why some of this defense stuff is like creeping up on him is because he was the Tasmanian devil, really, like early on with the Raptors. Just his court coverage was ungodly. It really was at such a high level. And he can kind of like crouch over at the hips, try and spy stuff, and then make plays. And once he lost a little bit of that athleticism, he has to do more preparation on defense. And I don't think he's doing as much as he should. And I think that's kind of been what's been happening over the past however many months of his defense. And he can turn it on. And when he's engaged, he's there. That's why like the extended pressure looks a little bit better. That's why switch looks a little bit better. But it used to be that when he would play drop with the Raptors, he's expecting like, I'm here, but I can immediately like flip hips and get parallel with the guy driving to the rim, and I'll keep him on the side and I can clean the glass. Or I can like backpedal, not necessarily even look springy, but I can get back to tip out a lob or something like that. And he's not at the same level now, so he can look kind of awkward navigating those situations. Also, to your point of hanging off of Jay Crowder, you can hang off of Jay Crowder, but you can't help off of him when Chris Middleton is guarded by TJ. Oh my God.
There was one play, though. I think I put it in here. Let me see if this was when Pascal. Yeah, so this one I actually really liked because we talked about this on the Pascal Impact pod that you came over and did with me. So this was like a rare sighting of Pascal making an impact play as the low man and making an emphatic block. So I would like to see more of that because I think that those are kind of his better roles at the current point in time, or if he's involved in the screening action, to just be doing more switching. But
this is my hope. This was both of our hopes, is that like Pascal is much better at like playing up and knowing what buffer he has to provide to ball handlers, especially guards, contain. Does a pretty good job containing those guys, making them take like a less than ideal shot. He's not so affecting that it's like, okay, I have to pass out of this. But with Pascal on ball, you can kind of get goaded into taking like that 16-foot fadeaway that a guard really, I don't know if that should be your shot, right? Or like that fading push shot, trying to get it off the glass. Those things aren't easy, and he can do that in switch. But the big thing is, as you said, like Pascal, like that's pride. Like get into the defensive action. He's big. And as much as he doesn't like lock in, he's more athletic than a lot of guys who occupies the similar space on the floor as he does. Like jump into the lane, make a few more plays a game, because he can kind of like sleepwalk his way into an okay level. But like, let's see a little bit more of it. That's
To that point, there was some games before the All-Star break, because I sent you clips of them, and I was like, this is concerning, and I can't really put my finger on what's going on here. Like, is he exhausted? Is he checked out? Like, is this a scheme issue? Is this, like, do they need to be rethinking how they're using him? And then when he came back after the All-Star break, there were elements that have improved, and you're not seeing as many long stretches where it's like, the no man's land and help side, or the just absolutely getting crushed on ball when he's navigating the screens to the same extent, or the off ball screening navigation issues. But yeah, I mean, I just think overall that I don't think it's probably been exactly what people have expected.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, you see him dial it up. And if you see someone dialing it up, especially in the regular season, you think, okay, that'll be there in the playoffs. But in the playoffs, you're still seeing, like, dialing it up on occasion. And it's like, keep it dialed. I don't know.
Yeah, the reason that I bring this up is because Bruce Brown at Media Day, he had said when he was asked about this defense, because they were talking about how many changes they were making, and now I will qualify and say that they've made other changes since what they were doing during preseason. Bruce Brown was like, I've never done anything like this before. Like, I've never guarded like this on an NBA team before. So, and talking about like not really having a low man in a lot of instances. So I just think that sometimes that there really has been an adjustment period. So in defense of Pascal, and knowing what Bruce Brown had said about the scheme and what some other players had said, like, I just really do think that there was like, this is very different than what other NBA defenses typically do in scheme that he needed time to fully integrate himself into doing.
Yeah. And like on top of that, I'm pretty sure Pacers fans, Pascal's averaging, 26, 10, and 5 with like a half a turnover a game right now.
Exactly, yeah.
You can't turn your nose up at it. He's been very, very good. And there's been little flashes of good defense. But, and covering Pascal for a long time, he can be better. And he probably knows that too. And I'm sure like there's coaches who say like, we'll show him film, like, this was great. More of this. This is what we want. And
it would have been telling if the Bucks roster was fully healthy to see who they would have felt comfortable putting him on.
Exactly.
Because a lot of the times, I mean, it's still Nesmith and Nembhard being assigned to top options in Pascal, which understandably so. When I talked to Lewis ahead of this series, I was like, I don't expect that they'll put him on Giannis because he's going to be too valuable to what they're doing offensively for all the reasons that you just laid out.
And like, that's the thing too, like Pascal, the type of impact he's supposed to provide. And I don't want to be too hard on Pascal. Pascal's been probably my favorite player to cover of my career covering players. He's a really unique player. Finding out what he succeeds at and seeing how it kind of affects teams is really cool. But it's last game, if you're like, why do you only score however many points? I thought he played his role on offense like really well. The shot making wasn't where you want it to be, but shot making is shot making. The thing is, his shot making can scale really high, as we saw in the first two games in this series. And the thing is, he's supposed to help provide his floor defensively. He can still give a little bit more there. And it's the playoffs. Like, get it there.
And the general point that I would want to make about it, because somebody did send a mailbag question asking about some of what's gone on with Siakam since game 2. I'm like, well, the coverage has changed vastly. What the Bucks have been willing to give up has changed. And life has gotten easier on Tyrese and Miles because of Pascal Siakam. They wouldn't have changed to doing what they're doing right now if Pascal hadn't done what he did in games 1 and 2. Yeah. So, and that wasn't an option that they had before him.
That he was really efficient taking on the doubles. Like, he made the right read. He's not wasting clock. He's not wasting possessions. He's putting other elite offensive players in stronger positions. It's shot making. You can't, like, 0 for 4 from 3 in a game like this. It doesn't matter, but he shot 38% from 3 as a Pacer. You hope to see that kind of at least in the vicinity over the course of the playoff run. And he missed a couple bunnies, but that's like, he's going to shoot over 50% inside the arc. At like every game, he'll find his way to it. The three-pointer is kind of a swing, but having 14 shots in this game, he's taking, like 25 in some of the games. It's just completely different coverage. And he's not, like, there can't be ego. The Pacers are scoring. It doesn't matter if Pascal...
And I think he's definitely led with that since he's come here. I mean, he's been very adamant that he wants to make the right winning plays for teammates. And also, something that you brought up, he's a champion. I don't think a lot of people, maybe outside of Toronto and outside of Indiana, because it's been brought up a lot here, that this is somebody who's coming with championship experience, readily think about that and what that means to a locker room with a lot of guys who have not played in a playoff series to this point. So
He's seen a lot. We talked about Pascal in the preview, like in the championship run. He saw Jonathan Isaac before injuries. Jonathan Isaac, like this insane defensive stopper. Then he saw Joel Embiid. Then he saw Brook Lopez. Then he saw Draymond Green. And then the next time he was in the playoffs, he saw like a glut of Celtics, and that was his worst series by far. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, including like him being in lockdown, not being able to play basketball for months, but tough. And then he played again like a 76ers team where Scotty Barnes was injured, Fred VanVleet was injured, Gary Trent Jr. was injured, and it was like Pascal versus the world. He knows what it looks like to have like a ton of defensive attention, and he knows what it looks like to play alongside like Kawhi Leonard and eat against another guy getting attention. And he's seen it at very high levels. And I think he's offensively has inputted incredibly well. But yeah, the defense is the sticking point and will be a little bit for whoever the next team they play is, or the Bucks or whatever it ends up being. But there's still another gear. There's still another gear here.
And I don't want to put the cart too far ahead of the horse, but when I brought up those plays about the pick and pop and at the center position, this was very much both teams being like, we're going to let the center do whatever they want to a certain degree.
Yep.
Whether that was Brook in the post or whether that was Miles popping out into space. And even when Brook was popping out into the space, they weren't even sending a stunt on a lot of those. One time they did start to stunt, and they literally ran away from Miles with the ball back to the player at the weak side 45. So he definitely made them pay for that. Like, hearing the Gamebridge Fieldhouse crowd chanting his name on that play that we talked about and that people are going to get sent to their email inbox when I finish the piece and it gets sent to them. I do think it's somewhat telling when you potentially look ahead to the next series, if Dame and Giannis remain out against this and plays out similarly to what we just saw in Game 5. That's something that the Knicks have done a lot too. It's just been like, hey, Miles, we're going to live with whatever you do from three. And there's times where he's definitely made them pay for that, where he's made 7 threes in a regular season game against them. But I guess, what do you think overall about Miles against that type of drop coverage in the next series as well? Or how this game was won for the Pacers if that were to carry over to their next opponent?
The Knicks would be in a very good position to offer like a lot of resistance to Pascal without offering up, without ceding ground elsewhere. Like, I've been a big Precious Achiuwa fan. Precious might factor into that series a lot more than he's factoring into this 76er series. OG, I don't know where OG goes. To me, he's like a top 3 defender in the world, has been for some time. He could gum some stuff up. We'll see if it's Ty. We'll see if it's Pascal. I don't know. But yeah, Knicks would be very interesting matchup. Pascal, like we spent a lot of time talking about the defense, but push would come to shove with his offense, creating against like the glut of Knicks that would be thrown at him, because the Knicks, they can just go one-on-one and like they're nice with it. The Knicks rock. I wish they had Randall. I would have picked them to go to the finals, man. I like that
very
team a lot.
quietly. They make that trade for Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic and send out Quentin Grimes. And for this particular matchup, that's why the OG dynamic's going to be interesting to watch as to who they will assign him to. Because the Knicks don't have a tailor-made person who's really set to guard Tyrese at the point of attack effectively. And Quentin Grimes was that person. Like, despite what some of his warts were offensively this year, he was a rare defender. I can make a very short list of people where if Tyrese rejects the screen, they can still beat him to that spot and still allow Mitchell Robinson to play in drop coverage, which I know he's been injured off and on as well. But
he's got good feet, hey? Quentin.
Yeah.
It also manifests in like how he comes off of like the screening actions on offense to get to his, his shot. His footwork is on both sides of the floor is really cool. It doesn't always manifest that way. Some guys are really slick. Like even Jalen is like this too, Brunson. Like his feet are incredible on offense, and sometimes they're really clunky on defense. But Quentin had it both ways.
Remember, he ducks under a lot of screens because he has a superpower for falling down and baiting fouls when he gets behind the screen. But yeah, I mean, I just was a little bit surprised, I guess, last night that after Miles had heated up to the degree that he was, that neither team was even going to veer back switching. Like, neither team was even sending the guard back to provide some amount of a contest there. I don't know.
Miles is a pretty good driver as far as like, especially for
If you
guys.
close hard to his right hand, it becomes less so, and not very many teams do that. I think I've seen him cross over right to left from outside the 3-point line once in his career. Otherwise, he drives right on like 80%, on almost 80% of his drives. And so few people, I don't know why. It's in part because he doesn't see hard closeouts to begin with. But very few people will close hard to his right. And I do think that that would affect some of the driving to a degree.
Yeah, that's also, he's a guy who, some guys can cross right to left and then put that extra dribble down with the left. But he's like a sweeping right to left, gather.
Yep.
And oftentimes he'll pick it up too early. You'll put yourself in kind of a difficult spot. If you go right to left and then a push dribble grab, then you're in the money, I think, at his size. But yeah, like he is a good driver for his size.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking about for his size. You know, there's probably ways you can, force him left. Yeah. Everything on the Pacers, force him left.
It actually does apply to a number of players other than Andrew Nembhard, because I actually wrote a piece about him like a year ago where he, in a lot of respects, purposely does things to his left, and so does Benedict Mathurin to an extent, just because he's so good at playing out a triple threat, and with his grab and go, it's more effective for him to really rip the ball baseline to his left. But Andrew, like I this is a stat that I really want to have access to. I don't know how you feel about it, but I want there to be tracking cameras that can tell me what pass accuracy into the shooting pocket is.
Oh, yeah. I saw you tweeted about that, right?
Because I feel like Andrew would be so high up on that list, especially when he makes one-handed passes with his left to the opposite corner. They're almost always directly in the shooting pocket. Very rarely does that player have to reach up and then dip back down or take a step to the left to meet that pass. I wish that we had access to that.
Yeah, what do they call it? Pocket accuracy. How often do you hit the pocket or something like that? There's so many variables to calculate for, though.
Right.
Like, what is a guy's pocket?
I mean, it's the same thing, though, with the tracking cameras and determining how close a closeout actually is, because it doesn't – I think they were working to adjust it this year, but in seasons past, it doesn't measure limbs. It only measures the position of the body. So a contest from Boban would be the same as a contest from TJ McConnell.
That's some stuff, too, with, like, finishing. It's like, it'll be like, he took a shot from 5 feet away. It's like, it was a finger roll, man. You know, it's just where your feet were. But yeah, there's limitations, of course. That's why you and I are sick little freaks who go and rewatch every play. But yeah.
Sometimes the numbers do lie, Samson.
They do sometimes, yeah. That's the truth of it.
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up. So do you have any closing thoughts that you want to add to any of this or anything separately that you're mulling around?
No, just happy to do some more basketball analysis with the best in the world, Caitlin Cooper.
Except for when you get in your group chat and DM other people about the Pacers besides.
No, these are just friends, like talking. I'm like, it's just, we like basketball, so we talk about basketball as it's happening. Am I talking about veer back switches with these guys? No.
I don't have any closing thoughts other than to say that I'm happy that Samson continues to do these with me and that he's committed himself to continue doing them with me if they do, in fact, make it to the next round. And it is kind of crazy to think about that this is going to be the first time that the Pacers have made it out of the first round in a decade.
If they make the finals and anybody in Indiana says that I can get credentialed, I'll be there.
If they make the finals, we'll be able to get credentialed in both places because my friend from Denver was like, you can come stay here.
Hell yeah.
Assuming the Nuggets are in the finals.
I think it could be Minnesota. They rock.
It could be.
Like, to me, Nuggets are the best team in the world. Minnesota is better than Boston, and then Boston. That's how I see it. But I'm a Boston, like...
You're a Boston naysayer.
I hate their playmaking. Very, very linear. Not very creative. I feel like as soon as Tatum makes that leap, then they can win some championships. But he just hasn't really made it.
I love how willing the Celtics have been all year to get weird. And the fact that the weirdness works. I love that you can turn on a Celtic game and you'll watch them put a center on a point guard and it works. And that they'll put Drew Holiday on Joel Embiid and for a time it works. And in part because, like, when I talked about that with Nesmith and putting guards onto fives, like something that's underrated about that is now Porzingis is the person doubling, and he has a 7'4" standing reach. Those passes out of the double teams get way more air under the ball. You have way more time to rotate out of them. they'll play a 2-1-2 zone and they'll morph from man to zone when the ball breaks the free throw line on the same possession. It's just like super fun stuff to track. Like watching Drew Holiday be a playmaker on defense is literally one of my favorite things. The Pacers always say glowing things about Drew. Like we've talked a lot about Andrew and comparing him to, Jalen Brunson and Jamal Murray, not because he's on that level of a player, but like skill set wise. And if you were to ask Andrew, he watches tons of film of Drew Holiday. That's who he tries to model what he does after. So,
well, if you make decisions like Drew Holiday makes, you don't even have to be like an elite athlete to be a good defender. But Drew Holiday is also like his feet incredible, and he's one of the guys at his size that can slide with like a 6'8" guy and not give any ground. Like he'll make a straight line, a curve drive. Like how the hell does this guy do this at 6'4"? He is usually the fire hydrant defenders are a little more immobile, but like Drew is the king of that archetype, and Lou Dort is like the prince. Like Lou Dort is coming for that spot if Drew ever ages out of it. But yeah, this isn't even a Pacers podcast anymore. We're just like we're talking about my group chats and Drew Holiday.
Sometimes people have asked, how often I get asked to cover the whole NBA, Samson? Fairly often. So
Same.
I don't think that people are gonna have too much of a problem with it, especially given what the overall quality of that game was last night.
You know what? People tell me that I should just start a YouTube channel and that I should just get so popular on YouTube that it pays the bills.
Well, I can tell you that a lot of people in the comments are saying that they hope that we continue doing this pretty much into perpetuity. So there you go.
Hello to the world of people with money. If anybody wants to see this continue to happen, pay us to do it. That's my sell.
I think that's a good way to close it out.
CPM on YouTube is not going to cut it. I'll say that much.
Feel free to send emails or direct messages my way, and I will field the inquiry.
Yeah.
I think that does it for us, and we'll be back after Game 5. Talk to you later.